Hello, my name is Keith McNally, and I wrote a full-length book about The Last of Us that you can get for free at keithcourage.com. And on this feed, I've been reading through the book, doing like a little audiobook version, and between chapters, I've been putting out other stuff, one chapter Last of Us, one podcast about some other video game shit. So I thought it's probably about time for this little break to talk about The Last of Us Part 2. So, I didn't like it. I didn't even finish it, which is so insane. Like, if you had told me, the guy who wrote a fucking giant book about The Last of Us, if you had told me I wouldn't like The Last of Us Part 2, I would be doubtful, but hey, maybe, Things are crazy. You can never predict what's gonna happen. I didn't like Uncharted 4 either. Naughty Dog's just been on a fucking downward spiral for me. So I would be doubtful, but I would be like, hey, maybe. But if you told me I wouldn't finish it, never in a million years. I would have bet you $1 billion that wasn't the case. But here we are, I got like halfway through. Specifically, I got, to the end of the Ellie stuff. And it wasn't even like, it was the worst feeling you could have. I wasn't like angry. I wasn't upset. I wasn't even disappointed. I was just, it's just like, I just don't want to do this. Fuck this, So I skipped ahead. I read about how the story winds up. And I'm like, well, that's terrible. And I just never went back. I thought I would. It's a beautiful game. I like the combat parts of it. I, of course, played it on crazy hard. So there were some crazy hard parts, but ultimately, that's still the part that I'm like, oh, I've heard about things in the Abby campaign that seem cool. Flaming islands and crazy shit happening. And I'm just like, I kind of want to know about that stuff, but I wish I could play a version of the game that had no storyline at all. If I could just play the combat version of The Last of Us 2, I'd play it all day. But, it didn't seem like my opinion was especially necessary or important because everyone fucking hated that game. I mean, it got amazing critical reviews and blah, blah, blah. And I feel like people are coming around on it a little. Nowadays, things seem a little kinder. But at the time that the game came out, is divisive, let's say. Sure, there was people that liked it. But it's one of those cases, like, you ever go through and read reviews of something and it's like the negative reviews are the well thought out ones and the ones that make sense. And you're like, yeah, I can see that point, I can see that point, and I can see that point. And then you read a positive review and it's like, well, fuck you, I like it. That's all people have got. I have never read a positive review of The Last of Us 2 that made sense to me. I'm like, yeah, but your expectations are too low. So you're okay with this. Because I could see that, absolutely. If The Last of Us 2 was a standalone game, I think I would have liked it in like a B-movie grindhouse kind of way. I'd be like, whoa, this is fucking bananas. I can't believe how these characters are acting. I can't believe the stuff that's happening. This is hilarious. Like, this is great. This is some shit, but it's some great shit. But unfortunately, it's the sequel to an extremely deft game, to an extremely meticulously made, extremely excellent game. And when you compare it to that, it's fucking trash, man. It's just garbage. It's just drive-in movie, B-level, schlocky shit. So this audio I recorded around the time Last of Us 2 came out, but I never released it because, like I was saying, it didn't seem important. It's not like there was some kind of cavalry I had to fucking try to bolster up. The flood of negativity was so huge and so well spoken, from kind of like the angry outrage level all the way up to just the hilarious meme level. People were just nailing this game to the fucking wall and doing a great job of it. So I was like, who cares about my thoughts? Who gives a shit? It's not important. And it didn't feel like exciting to talk about because it's like I was saying, the same way that I just the game just evaporated for me and I just stopped playing. That's how I felt. It's like I feel like I need to talk about it because I'm the guy who wrote the Last of Us book and people were asking me what I thought about the Last of Us 2. And it just is like, I guess I need to talk about this, but I really didn't want to. It didn't seem vital. It didn't seem interesting. It's just like, buh, this game, you know? But that's what this audio is, in case you're curious. In case you're interested, I figure now's a good time to finally put it out there. Put it out there for posterity. Because there is a chapter in my book about The Last of Us 2, which at the time there was very little information about. So, I mean, for the record, here it is. Here's what the guy who wrote The Last of Us book thinks about The Last of Us Part 2. But I do want to mention a couple of things first. Things that have happened in the interim since I recorded this audio. First, I just thought of a different way to explain my problem with The Last of Us 2's writing that I hadn't thought of at the time, that I think kind of sums it up. If you have to talk about not why this specific thing didn't work or that specific thing didn't work, like if you just want to talk about the totality of why I feel like it didn't work, I think one way to explain it is that in the original Last of Us, I was on everybody's side, potentially. Like I feel like every group had a viable take on the situation, had a viable mindset. Like obviously you get Joel, Tess, Ellie, all the main characters, but even stuff like the military in Boston, you know, like they have their reason for behaving the way they do in the apocalypse. Or like the hunters in Pittsburgh, that one's a lot harder to justify, but you can still understand it, you know, you can see how they got into this crazy situation that they're in. And David with his cannibal people, the Fireflies at the end, literally every group in that game, you're like, yeah, like I'm not on your side, I'm on Team Joel. But even Team Joel is a controversial fucking position, and I can see where everyone else is coming from. It's such a well-balanced storyline, and that's like a pretty rare thing to find. That doesn't happen very often. So I think if I had to just put a big blanket over Last of Us 2 and like, what's my problem? It's that it's the reverse. I don't follow the logic of anybody, not anyone, you know, no fucking character in that game, no group, no situation. At no point do I feel like, yeah, you know what, given the apocalypse world that we're in, I understand why this person is acting this way, and I understand why they're doing what they're doing. I actively don't understand. I mean, with Ellie in particular, I'm like, what is this garbage? like you really gotta struggle to buy into her dumb motivations. And Abby should be very easy to understand. On the surface, Abby's revenge story makes all the sense in the world. And like, again, I didn't play through the whole Abby thing, but what I know of it, I'm like, no, are you kidding? Get out of here. You know? The way Tommy and Joel act at the start, just the whole thing. I mean, fuck it. Again, it's just like, God, it's not fun to talk about. What a stupid fucking game. What a piece of shit. But the other thing that happened since I recorded this audio that is awesome is there are these two dudes who dropped me a line who worked at Naughty Dog. They've left since then, but they worked at Naughty Dog during the production of The Last of Us 2. And they said it was like a tough time being inside the company because they both had big problems with The Last of Us 2 and the direction it was going in. They were not fans of that game, but they didn't have a lot of support within the studio. Obviously the people in there, they believed in this bizarre vision of The Last of Us 2, obviously, or they wouldn't have fucking made it. And now that the game's out, you know, and it had this huge backlash and it's gonna be forever remembered as bizarre outsider art rather than a classic. Now the pressure's off, but they said while they were in there, you know, they couldn't talk to anyone on the outside. They couldn't tell anyone outside how they felt about this game or how things were going. But they had both read my book. This fucking blew my mind. They both read my book and they both thought like, hey, this guy would understand. And they kind of made like a little pact of like, after the game comes out, we got to talk to this guy. We got to just sit down and have the fucking debrief and just get all of this shit off of our chests about what it was like to work on this game. And they thought it would be like, hey, let's take a road trip to Canada or whatever. They didn't expect COVID world. But we did do that. We just hung out on Zoom, and literally like 6.5 hours, the three of us talked about The Last of Us 2. And just how, the way one of them described it was, it's like the sun and the moon, you know, the South Pole and the North Pole. The first game is the like greatest example you could ever find of how to do storytelling in a video game the right way. And The Last of Us 2 is like the greatest, most perfect example of how to fuck up everything, how to just fuck up every fucking thing. And yeah, it was a great talk. It would have been like the greatest ever. I asked them, I'm like, hey, what if we like record this and I use it as the basis for like another book, like a hit piece on The Last of Us 2? And they were like, no, look, like, let's just keep this between us. Doesn't need to go there. And they're right, it really doesn't, because everyone else has already done that. You know, there's no story to break here. Everyone understands that something went horribly wrong with The Last of Us 2. But I just thought that was so great. It was so great that, you know, this is not the most popular book in the world that I wrote, but that some guys inside Naughty Dog read it, and that I had even the opportunity, the potential opportunity to help. You know, it's such a great feeling, because like I said, there's only one little chapter in the book about The Last of Us 2, but one of the dudes showed it to Neil Druckmann. He's like, hey, this guy wrote this book about The Last of Us. I know you're not going to read it and you don't care, but like, look at this. Like, here is a rare outside perspective about this game, because, you know, they just had no input from the outside. Everyone in Naughty Dog was just hunkered down. Don't spoil anything, don't let anything out, don't tell anyone about the game. So they had no outside opinion. But that scene from The Last of Us stage play they did, where they did like a special little scene of Joel playing guitar for Ellie, turns out that is a scene in The Last of Us Part 2, and I didn't like it. And I wrote in the book about how I didn't like it. So this dude at Naughty Dog was like, hey, Druckmann, listen, just as an example, just as a for instance of where we might be going wrong with this, here's what this guy who wrote a whole book about The Last of Us, here's why he doesn't like this scene from The Last of Us Part 2. And I feel that way, and so do some others, and like, just to try to get a foothold in of like hoping to make someone see that the direction of The Last of Us 2 was going off the rails. And yeah, it didn't work, but I thought that was so awesome. That, you know, you write a book, you work on anything, you hope that someone gives a shit. And just that it even got that far. That like, even if it was 1% of 1% of 1% of a chance that my Last of Us book could have helped keep Last of Us 2 from going over the edge of a cliff, that was a good feeling. I was very proud of that. You know, it's like, what else could I do? You know, I did what I could, and it didn't work. Those guys, like, they broke their backs. They tried crazy hard to like make someone hear what the problems were with The Last of Us 2. Man, it was like having that talk with them. It's just like, God, what a nightmare. What a terrible situation it sounded like. Like, they both got into that company because of The Last of Us, because it's the greatest game ever. And now they're working on the sequel to the greatest game ever. It's a dream position. It's like everything in life is working out great. And then they just get stuck in this bizarre world for years where they feel like they're the crazy ones because they're the ones who don't like the game. And then there's like at least some sense of validation and vindication when the game comes out and people fucking hate it. But still, but I remember I said that to them and they're like, yeah, that is nice. But it would still be better if this never happened. If The Last of Us 2 was good, that would be much, much better, you know? But anyway, The Last of Us 2, man, what the fuck? So here's the stuff I recorded when The Last of Us 2 came out. Hope you enjoy, whatever. We'll be back with more of my audiobook about The Last of Us 1 after this, which thankfully remains a classic. That used to bother me a lot more when I was younger, like when a bad sequel came out, and I'm like, oh no, this is kind of denigrating the original. I don't really feel like that anymore. I have an easier time sort of compartmentalizing works of art. The Last of Us 1 can stay on its own and be its own thing. And The Last of Us 2 is just like bizarre, extremely expensive, high fidelity fan fiction. It just doesn't count. I don't care that it's made by the same company. I don't care that it's written by the same guy. That shit doesn't count. That shit never happened. That shit sucks. All right. So let's time warp back to the release of The Last of Us Part 2. So I found this little, it's like this, I don't know, it's just like a field that's really overgrown. And there's a sort of a path, you know, like this is clearly where cars have driven. There's like a little bit of, you know, the two tire lines, tire tracks or whatever that are clearly leading somewhere, but they're pretty overgrown too. This is a little bit of a tricky walk. But yeah, I'm just on this, I mean, I can see pretty far into the distance, and I might be here for a little while. And there's nothing here, and it's all quiet. But I was like, man, this is such a perfect time to do a podcast. The only thing I kind of had on the docket to talk about is the fucking Last of Us Part 2. But I just kind of don't really want to, which is like telling, I think. I wrote a great big fat book about the video game The Last of Us, and I used it as a jumping off point just to talk about video games in general throughout my life. So anyway, I obviously liked that video game The Last of Us a lot. Though, like I said, the book was about video games in general more than it was about The Last of Us, but everything was focused through the prism of The Last of Us, because it's just a really good game for that, a really good touchstone for a lot of different things. So The Last of Us Part 2 just came out, and it's fucking lame. And I don't like it at all. And it's just, not at all, but inevitably people are asking me like, so what do you think about this game? I'm not alone. It's extremely poorly regarded by the fan base. It's this weird thing where the critics almost universally gave it extremely high grades, high rankings, high reviews. But the fans, for various different reasons, it's got incredibly low review scores. So I'm not alone. It's not like crazy and controversial that I don't like this game. But because I wrote this entire fucking book, obviously people want to know what I think about the sequel. So it's like, I guess I got to talk about it. I guess I got to touch on this at some point. But it's like weird. It's like not even interesting to talk about. It's so lame. Though, I mean, I could talk about it at enormous length, because video games in general is just a really complicated subject. You can't just talk about the game as a game, because that wise, it's pretty amazing. It's all the stuff from the first game. So the gameplay part, pretty good. They added some new shit. It all seems pretty cool. Fidelity-wise, it's incredible. The graphics are amazing. In this case, it just really comes down to the story. But because the story was such a big part of the first game, that the story is so bad in the second one, it really is kind of a deal breaker. Kind of doesn't matter. You know, a lot of games, if the game's fun, you can just play the game and ignore the story. But since this thing is so based on story and is a direct sequel to something else, I couldn't do that. I couldn't just be like, oh, well, fuck this story. I'll just play it as a fun little apocalypse stabbing simulator. And I guess I'm gonna spoil stuff, but kind of not really, you know? Like, I guess if you haven't played The Last of Us 2 and you're intending to, I guess you shouldn't listen to this, because I'm gonna spoil some stuff. But the storyline is so lame and so bad that there's like not much to spoil. I'm gonna spoil the initial setup, I guess. I'm gonna spoil the first 2 or 3 hours of the game. And really that's it, because that's where it goes off the rails and it never recovers. Like, there's no need to even spoil anything else beyond that. So, it does have an extremely important lesson to tell about writing. Just wonder, how much do I need to explain to set the scene for all this? Again, I guess I just won't get that deep into it because I just don't care. It's not interesting. It's such a bad story. They did such a bad job. But basically, in the first game, it's very violent and very graphic, But it feels justified because the characters are put into a bad situation. You know, they're in an apocalypse world. They're constantly getting attacked by others. It's kind of like The Road. You can't really blame them for the terrible things that they do, you know? And it's like a neat meditation on violence. Like, it really is really brutal and really graphic and really realistic violence. But it's also kind of justified. And then that raises the question, when is violence justified? Blah, blah, blah. But the characters were definitely on the defensive. And plot-wise, again, it's not like an amazing plot, but it feels natural. Like, it feels like the events that happen to these characters, they do some pretty terrible stuff. In particular, at the end of the first game, Joel, he does some pretty awful things. And it was a little controversial at the time of like, how come you don't have the choice? Isn't the point of a video game that you're controlling this character? You should be able to choose whether you want to do these terrible things or not. But it was neat because the point was, you're not this guy. This guy is Joel. He's a weird, hardened survivor. He has a lot of guilt about his daughter dying. He's not going to let another daughter figure die. It doesn't matter what you think and it doesn't matter what you want. This is who this guy is and he's going to do these things. And the whole plot, it emerged in that way. Like, it emerged from the characters. It's like you can't really imagine a different outcome because these characters are just behaving as they have to behave. The plot comes from the characters. Because this is what went wrong in the second game. In the second game, instead of the plot emerging from the characters, like in the first game, they made a whole documentary about the first game called Grounded, because that was the term, that was their fucking guiding light, that was the thing. If they ever weren't sure what to do next, the term was grounded. Keep it grounded. And the second game is not grounded at all, because instead of the plot arising from the personalities and the natural inclinations of these characters, instead they had a plot in mind. It's like, all right, this is going to be the plot. And now we'll do whatever we have to do in order to present this plot. And really, that's the whole message I'm trying to portray here. This is my whole takeaway from this game. Even if I don't do a great job explaining this or whatever, this is the lesson. And it absolutely is. Like, I don't usually go in for these, like, this is how you do it type of fucking things with writing. But I do in this case. The characters have to come first. If you want things to feel real and earned and justified and grounded, the characters come first. People can only behave in the ways that they would behave. And the plot has to emerge from that. And if you've got some other plot in mind, and you have to start twisting and warping your characters in order to make that plot a reality, that's never gonna be good. That is the wrong way to do it. That is fucked up. And it's so weird that it seems like the people who wrote the second game, the second The Last of Us, they just didn't know that. My theory is that it's because it's video games. Video games in general don't have a lot of writers in a conventional sense. People have tried it and it just doesn't work. Like, trying to combine writing with video game mechanics is not that easy. It's way more natural for designers and programmers and video game makers to then make the stories. And that's what happened in this case too. The lead dude, his name's Neil Druckmann, he moved up in the ranks over years and years and years and became more and more senior and had all these famous games. And then The Last of Us 1 in particular won every award in the world. And he's like vice president of the company now. He can do whatever he wants, but I feel like there's just basic things about writing he doesn't know and he never learned. And he just fucking stepped in it hard with this one. He just slipped on a banana peel. And it's so weird for like tens of millions of dollars to be spent and hundreds of people spending years working on this thing that is like amateur bullshit. It is fucking amateur hour. It's so lame. And just basically, so to describe it vaguely, Ellie from the first game, it's a few years later, she's a bit older. Something bad happens to Joel and she's very upset. And she decides that she needs to get a revenge. And there's no question that this idea came before anything else, because you can find tons of interview clips of Neil Druckmann doing interviews before the game came out, where he's like, if the first game's theme was love, then the second game's theme is hate. He had that all planned out, and it's like, oh no, you're already going wrong, because yeah, maybe the first game's theme was love. You could make that argument. I wouldn't really say so. But you could say that, but it's not like that was the plan. It's obvious that wasn't the plan. That's just what happened. That's how the plot ended up as everything unrolled. The first game felt way more natural than that, where the second game does not. The second game is about hate. The second game is about revenge and the cycle of revenge, and like, revenge won't get you anywhere and revenge will only make your life worse. But it's so ham-fisted and so ridiculous, because like I said, we're in an apocalypse scenario, big time apocalypse. And in the first game, it was always that the violence was put upon them. Oh, what's this? I see a little tent. I wonder if there's people around. Maybe I should stop ranting to myself for a sec. Seems like there's nobody here. I think about that sometimes. If I lived somewhere warmer, I bet I could be a tent guy. Just lives out in the weird random side of the fucking river. But it just gets too cold around here, and then you die. So yeah, in the first game, the characters were doing your classic cross-country trek during the apocalypse. They're beset upon by others, and they have to fight them. They have no choice. It's maybe not incredibly realistic that they survived, but it's sort of believable. This guy Joel is like a 20-year veteran of the apocalypse. He's a badass motherfucker, and the game's got a lot of stealth stuff. So it's like, as long as he's getting the drop on people, it's not realistic that one guy could kill 300 guys. But it's a video game, You gotta accept a certain amount of video game nonsense. And at least they tried to justify it. A lot of guerrilla warfare, He's not directly fighting people. And the game went well out of their way to reinforce that type of shit. Like, if you run directly at a guy with a gun, in most video games you can do that. Here, you're just dead. You just don't do that. You gotta sneak around. You gotta get the drop on the guy. Was a big component of the first game. Where in the second game, it's like, oh, I'm angry. I need revenge. So Ellie takes a 2-week trip to a different city, just where these people she wants revenge against, where they're hanging out. And just none of it feels real. None of it feels realistic at all. If this is supposed to be a harsh, brutal, realistic apocalypse world, it doesn't matter if you want revenge. It doesn't matter, if you're angry. First off, her anger doesn't feel realistic. She doesn't really talk it out with people. She doesn't express it in a realistic way. It's very shallow. It's just like, I'm angry. 2 weeks later, I'm still angry. Fuck it, I'm going. Not believable. And then even if you accept that, this is a suicide mission. That's all this is. One person against a whole militia. You're just gonna die. You're immediately gonna die. I don't care that it's a video game at this point. That's too much to swallow. It changes the entire paradigm of the first game, where instead of being reactive, now it's proactive. Now it's like, I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna deliberately kill those 300 people. And the first game took place over an entire year. This game takes place over 4 days, and Ellie kills like 100 people, easy. And it's just fucking stupid. It's like the stupidest, it's the way people describe Rambo movies, but Rambo movies aren't even that bad. Rambo does not kill that many guys. And if they had really, really carefully threaded the needle in order to explain how this situation was happening, why this situation was occurring, maybe, but they don't. It's literally just, I'm mad, I'm gonna go take out these people. And Ellie's friend comes with her. And it's just like, that's also no fucking way. No fucking way. It's like this little fling that started literally the day before. And now it's like, yeah, okay, I'll come with you on the death march. I'll come with you on the suicide mission. I'm not a 20-year grizzled survivor of the fucking apocalypse. I'm like just a 20-year-old random chick. But I'll come along with you. Like, it's just walking into a meat grinder. And over the 2 weeks it takes them to get to this other city, and then the 4 days of the game proper, that second character never has the heart-to-heart with Ellie of like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, I get that you were mad, but it's been a little while now, and this whole situation is completely unreal and insane. Let me talk you down off the ledge. And no one ever even does that. And Ellie does not act like herself. She does not act at all like she did in the first game. And you're like, all right, well, it's been 4 years since then. But they have frequent flashbacks to the in-between times. And nothing is leading up to this. Nothing prepares you for this. It's so shit. It's so fucking shit. Ellie's angry, and Ellie's little angry face, and everything's just, ooh, anger. And I mean, she's literally stabbing pregnant women and killing dogs and doing all this insane shit. And like I said, the first game, also very violent, but it was like a commentary on the terribleness of people, you know? Of like, especially in an apocalypse and people are desperate, they just want what you have. They're attacking you, and you need to protect yourself and those you care about. And it's brutal and it's harsh, and it's a shame that reality is that way and that human beings are that way, but they are. And to me, that kind of justified the violence. Where in this game, the graphical fidelity is even better. If you throw a bottle at someone's face, the pieces of glass stick in their face. You can knock their teeth out. Their blood pools realistically on different surfaces. It's fucking disgusting. And this time, it's proactive. Ellie decided to like, I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna go stab all these pregnant ladies and all these dogs and not fucking just say badass quips about it. It's just fucking gross. It's a fucking disgusting, that game. Because the context is very important. Makes a huge difference. And all of this happened because at the outset, Neil Druckmann had the idea, this game's gonna be about revenge. This game's gonna be about the cycle of hatred. And suddenly, the characters aren't acting like themselves anymore. The scenario is not remotely believable. Nothing is grounded. No one's making choices that you can believe a person would make. It's just brutal. And it's so obvious, like especially later in the game, you start playing as a second character, and it's like both characters are trying to get revenge on each other. And it's just this super childish message of like, hey, you know, if you go seek revenge, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna satisfy you like you think. But nobody thought it did, you know? From the fucking outset, nobody was on board with this stupid plot. Not nobody, but a lot of people. Like I said, very huge fan backlash to this fucking game. Where like 2 hours into the game, the character starts acting insane and doing stuff that nobody can fucking, you know. It's like in the first game I was saying how the guy Joel does terrible things that you're like, oh God, I wish he didn't do that. But it makes sense to the character. In this case, it does not make sense to the character. Nobody wants her to do this. Everyone's like, nah, it's crazy. What are you doing? Stop. Just stop. And then the game keeps going for like 14 more hours, just continuously reinforcing this message of like, hey, look at this. If you act insane, if you act like a crazy psycho stabbing everyone that you're a little mad at, guess what? Your life's not going to go well. And that message just keeps getting pounded into your face for the whole thing, right up to the bitter fucking end of the credits. It's just like, it's such shit. So not only is it a terrible idea just conceptually, just it's a bad idea from the standpoint of constructing a story, to have your big theme and to have your big, here's what the fucking message is gonna be, and may everything else be damned so we can fucking present this message. But man, it better be a good message. And the message in Last of Us Part 2 is fucking garbage. It's nothing. It's worthless. Anyway, I can kind of hear cars in the distance. I think I'm finally almost back to civilization. That's more than enough of talking about that stupid game. It's just like, fuck me. But basically, in a nutshell, that's the takeaway. Your plot needs to emerge naturally out of your characters. Your characters dictate the plot. Your characters dictate what's going to happen. If you just decide on your big storyline, your big message, your big theme, and then strong arm your way to it, your characters are not going to feel realistic. They're not going to feel natural. And it's particularly strange feeling in the case of a sequel like this, when I think this is why the backlash was so strong. Ellie and Joel both act bizarre in this game. They do not act like themselves. And if this was our first introduction to them, well then it's like, you know, I think I'd still be like, well, this is not very good writing. But I would give it more of a benefit of the doubt. Whereas in this situation, it's like, no fucking way, dude. We know these characters. We've spent a lot of time with these characters already. Whoever these new ones are, this is fucking weird. It's like weird fan fiction. It's like super expensive fan fiction made by the actual creator, which is very strange. But anyway, glad to get that done with, because yeah, that game just annoys me to talk about. I don't like it. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next time.